Welcome to Reimagining Cyber, the podcast where we look beyond the headlines and explore what cybersecurity really means for organizations and the people behind them. My name is Tyler Moffitt, Senior Security Analyst, and today I'm joined with my colleague, Keelin Conant, and today we're going to talk about what happens after ransomware attack, and specifically like the immediate crisis when it might be over, but the much harder work of rebuilding the business and restoring the trust and helping the people recover has basically only just begun. So, Keelin, thanks for joining me. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Tyler, thank you so much for having me. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be with you. I'm a senior account manager with OpenText, and I also have my own podcast called the cybersoul.io, which I started when I worked for a MSP that focuses almost solely on ransomware restoration. And I created the podcast at first just to really understand the human side, what we're talking about today, of what happens with these attacks. And getting, past the letters we get in the mail and the ROI that happens, things like that, and really just trying to understand the human aspect of it. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive right in. A lot of people all talk about ransomware recovery as if it begins and ends with just restoring the systems. But since you've actually seen what actually happens inside the organization after an attack, I guess let's start there. So when you first enter an organization after a ransomware attack, what does the situation actually feel like on the ground?
A lot of times the situation is very tense, and the people who are trying to fix it are very tired, exhausted, I would say. And when this company would come in, the victims, I'll even call them, were just so relieved that there was actually help there and that they could, get out of this. So, I've seen things from people having heart attacks, from people, retiring from a career that they had built over 30 years. I've seen people be diagnosed with cancer after an attack. I mean,
Wow.
These are real human situations that happen that, we don't really dive into when we get that letter in the mail that our, data has been put out there.
You mentioned health, and I think that's a really good point, especially like the heart attack. I'll get drill down in there. Like that's a lot of pressure. Likely, you can't say 100% attributed to it, but obviously had a contribution to it. Who would you say is usually under the most pressure in those first hours?
Well, it's going to be the IT team that's discovered it, right? So it could be an outsourced IT company, but it could be a legacy IT person who has probably been telling their leadership for years that there are vulnerabilities, that we should invest in, some sort of additional cybersecurity posturing. And those are usually the people that, it falls hardest on because this is their network. This is their baby. They've been nurturing it for years, knowing that there are solutions out there, and sometimes the leadership falls on deaf ears, maybe because there isn't budget, maybe because, there's only so much time and money that needs to be put out there, or maybe just I want to say the salespeople, could tell a better story in order for these companies to understand the significance.
That's good. Yeah, that's good stuff. I guess one thing I want to also ask about is, at what point do people realize that restoring the technology is not always the same or really the same as restoring the business? Specifically, like what could still be broken even after important systems are like technically online? That's where I want to know,
So what happens after attack more often than not is that it goes into triage. This is we're trying to stop the bleeding. We're trying to, get the business to a stable point. Almost never can you get it back 100% because there's just things that have been broken that are outdated. Like you literally actually can't update, a 2008 server. Like it needs to be degraded. But on the other side of it, there's reputation that's on the line. There are stress points that happen. And here's the other thing that I'm not sure everybody knows. So I think there's an idea out there that, okay, we got hacked. Okay, fine. We got hacked. Let's just move forward. Your chances of being hacked again go up significantly after the first one. So if you're focusing only on triage and not prevention at that point, under the assumption that, oh, they're going to check us off their list, we've already been attacked, that's a very fatal move as well, because again, I've seen many companies who we go in, got them all cleaned up, and they were attacked again.
So they just focused with coming back online, but not actually fixing or plugging the holes that got them in the problem in the first place. I'm guessing like something like a backdoor or an update or something they didn't patch, I would guess.
Yeah. It could be a patching vulnerability. It could be the threat actors are going after the backups, and it could also be, and here goes back to the human piece of it, the human firewall, all of us, there are I want to call it blunt force trauma attacks. And what they do is they send hundreds, if not thousands, of password reset emails over and over to exhaust the system, right? And, someone who maybe isn't on the technical side, they're already overworked, overburdened, maybe they accidentally click the link because they've gotten so many of these emails, or they got an email that looks really good. It looks exactly like every other invoice they've ever received, right? Like that's a pretty popular one. So that person also, there's a lot of, I'll even say trauma around, oh, it was me that clicked that link. The person that gave the password away from the MGM hack a couple years ago, right? Like think about how that person feels.
Right. No, definitely. You already covered one of the biggest ones, I think, which was interesting, that they're more likely to be attacked again, especially when they're just focused on recovery and getting things back up in line. You got to realize, how did they get in? But I'm guessing, what else? What does leadership tend to underestimate at this stage?
I think that, the attack happens. All hands are on deck. Everyone's awoken to this situation that, by the way, the IT person has probably been talking about for a very long time, but maybe they haven't been, right? So all of a sudden the insurance carrier comes in, pocketbooks are open. Suddenly there's attention, right? Just like on the news, there's a sensational news story. Everyone's attention's on it. But what happens after a week to that news story? What happens after 2 weeks? Right? It fizzles away. So same thing happens. We are of human nature. A new, things become stabilized, but maybe not all the way fortified. And time goes on. And you get back into your old habits. Maybe you cut corners in places.
That's a good point. Yep. The fundamentals, discipline there. Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about the people who end up carrying the burden, carrying the recovery. Who ends up doing that? What does that burden look like after the first few days?
Well, luckily there's companies like, I'll give a shout out to Avaka, the company that I used to work for, that specifically focus on the cleanup. They are the cleanup crew. They are available 24/7 to do this. And there's a lot of IT companies out there, I'd say MSPs, that they've gone through one or two of these and they're like, we don't want to do that ever again. But there's also IT people who try to hide it and they try to fix it themselves. And that's when, the company comes in and sees the exhaustion, because sometimes you can't fix it. Sometimes it's too far past, that skill base. And it's not a blame game, which I think there are blame games that happen in these incidents. It's really, it's a culmination of many fault points. Like what they say, like when a plane crash happens, there's at least 7 things that go wrong. You can lose an engine in mid-flight, you can lose a tire, things like that. But when things start to accumulate, that's when, a disaster happens.
Yeah, I think the decision fatigue and burnout, like all that stuff starts to appear. It's definitely tough during this. You mentioned some of those people like, I don't want to do it again. Like I can only imagine.
Think about that. That's like, and that's usually, like a managed, service provider, an outsourced IT company who probably, was telling this company, hey, you need to do these things. And most MSPs at this point have the company sign off and say, we are liable for anything that happens because we're not listening to our MSP. We've decided that, we don't have the budget for a managed, an endpoint protection or something like that. So the MSPs are protecting themselves, but then they still have to go in because they're the trusted IT company. And if they're the ones who are saying they never want to go through it again, think about what the company goes through. Everybody is very well behaved in office environments for the most part. Now I've seen, go down, in these very high intensity, boardrooms, Zoom rooms, whatever. Think about what happens when they go home, though, quote unquote. The energy that we're releasing to our families, to our kids. Kids are sponges. They pick up on all of that. Yeah. Yeah. In our community, and I'm not sure. I'm a big mental health advocate. I had my own coaching business. I'm a consultant. I do believe that being able to talk about these things openly and figure out the feelings around them is just as important as patching up your system.
No, that's a good point. And I guess also too, during this time of, severe stress, on the business and the employees too, the employees from leadership, they sort of want certainty, but the organization and the leadership might not even know the full scope of the damage. How should leaders even communicate to their employees who want that explanation or certainty of when things are going to come back online or what the sort of a reassurance, that's tough.
It is tough because when you're dealing with a situation like this, you do have breach counsel, the lawyers protecting liability because it's hugely liable. And I actually, on my podcast, interviewed a breach lawyer that can kind of shed more light on that. But as honest as the leaders can be, without going against their lawyers, recommendations, I think it's the better because nothing creates, more anxiety than bad gossip, than wrong gossip, and if let's say the wrong person gets blamed, that can also create a lot of friction and then people aren't focusing.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. You also want to make sure that you're saying something, there's definitely danger in saying too little, where that's where the rumors start to come up and things like that, and the blame game, if that makes sense.
My favorite leaders are the ones that are as honest as they can be and should be. I don't think that we have to, as leaders, expose every single thing. However, open communication and, putting, as a leader, I think it's really powerful that you have to remember where you came from and putting yourself into those employees' shoes and what they could be feeling, taking a breath, and just grounding yourself to remember, how is all of this going to affect, just like if you had a shooting in a building, how would a company handle that? I don't think we're handling the breaches like that, and they can be just as traumatic.
Right. And even when you get everything back online, right? The pressure doesn't necessarily disappear. I mean, some of the most serious consequences may not even be visible or apparent until weeks or months later. So let's talk about that. What are the long-term consequences that never really appear in the headline or the initial incident cost estimate?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the long-term consequences are going to be monetary. Can't disregard that, right? Depending on whose data was leaked, how much of your customers' data was leaked, you do have to make some sort of declaration to those customers. And a lot of times, there will be a public notice that doesn't usually come until a year or two after. So,
Really?
I've gotten the letters, you've gotten the letters, hey, your data's been leaked. If you really look at it and look and see, you can go back and find out, well, when did this leak? When did this happen?
Gotcha. I guess I was thinking crisis comms from a publicly traded company or something.
Sometimes there's that, but a lot of times they're going to try to figure out whose data was actually affected because the more minimum we can, the minimum impact, because if my data was leaked and your data wasn't, let's leave Tyler out of this one.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I could totally see that angle of, find out way later from a little net letter and then you have to go look somewhere to find out what was even compromised and when it was.
So it is kind of a nightmare that will continue to happen. And I again, on my season last year that I did on the cybersol.io, I did interview also a crisis communication person who talked about exactly what all those steps are that a company goes through. And again, remember, when you've been ransomware attacks specifically is what we focused on, but there are different extortions. There's so many scams out there. Once you've been hit once on a company or even on an individual level, you're more likely to be targeted again.
Yeah, no, we've definitely seen that as well with just even if they did everything as far as patching up what they saw, there are groups out there depending on how well they're doing financially. So depending if they're hit by like a ransomware as a service group and for whatever reason they're not as successful as they were when they were hitting people, they will re-hit some of the people, that they previously said that, you paying the ransom sort of covers you and you'll never be hit again. We've seen them walk back on their word, but they usually have to, be in a bad spot. But we've absolutely seen it. Lockbit is an example. When they sort of were phased out because they like fight each other. It's weird. Like some of these ransomware groups will go after the affiliates because that's where most of the money is made now. It's an affiliate generation where they contract the low level affiliates who actually perform or raise their hand and say, I'll go and attack people. And
ransomware as a service.
Exactly. Well, they
Yep.
get about a 30% cut because they're the ones raising their hand saying, I'm willing to conduct the attack. You give me the payload and the infrastructure, the command and control server and the leak site and everything I would need and the comms and the payment portals, like whatever they would need to pull off the attack. But they're the ones pulling off the riskiest thing with the fingerprint. And that's why you normally see like the affiliates getting arrested from, the FBI or Interpol. They're never catching the high level developers that make the infrastructure or the leak sites. But anyway, so they'll fight over affiliates. And so we'll see some ransomware groups lose affiliates to another. Specifically, Lockbit lost a whole bunch to Ransom Hub. This was like last year or whatever. And so then Lockbit, because it's like not making as much money as it was making, decides to then re-hit people they had already paid them. And I was just like, they sort of ruined the business model, the criminal business model, because a lot of people pay because they do believe that, they get their files back and they won't be hit again. And when you ruin that trust, you ruin the model. So, very interesting.
And the files are out there too. You know what I mean? Like there's such a risk and, we don't have a time machine, but we should never have paid in the first place, and I think one of the things that I sit up and, kind of pontificate about is it too late? What's the end game? How much more data is out there? There's cyber criminals. When the fires happened here in California, I'm located in Southern California, people's data had been leaked. And when they went to go, this was actually on the news, when they went to go cash in their FEMA check, they found out that it was already been cashed. Because the criminals had figured out that leaked data from wherever, it could have been a ransom attack, it could have been MGM, your phone, whatever. And they went and they had already cashed the checks. Isn't that crazy? Like
that's wild.
That's the level.
I can see it though. Just some website that's up waiting for you to enter your social security number and your address. And then, okay, next
Boom.
Page is allowed. Go ahead and input your, bank details. And they already did it and siphoned it. So
yeah. I mean, it sometimes I have these conversations and like people walk away and they're just so scared. And I don't mean to scare people. And this is real. This is a reality. They already know on the news right now this is August 10th, 2026. I keep seeing reports, and this is something that I and other technology leaders have been very worried about for a while, is that Iran is starting to go after our water and they're testing, like our water infrastructure, like all of our infrastructure is protected by cybersecurity. And
a lot of them very old and dated.
I didn't want to say that, but you said it. So we just all need to remain very diligent. And on top of it, just to get to a philosophical conversation, I feel like we all live on one planet, and it's huge feedback to us as an American society how under attack we are by other countries.
Yeah, it's constant.
It is. And to them, they don't feel like they are committing a crime. And a lot of times, actually, they're not. Like, it's not illegal to hack us in China or Russia.
No,
or the
they
Ukraine.
get PTO. That, like, the nation state attacks. They work in an office building.
Yeah,
they talk about how they breached some under defended, system or whatever at the water cooler, and how they did this, and like, oh, okay, that's a good angle. They probably have quotas. I don't even know.
I bet they do, because they are treating it like a sales pipeline. Like, okay, we already attacked this one. Let's go back and see if we can attack them again.
Yeah.
And anyone who's listening to this, I just want to say, like, there is no one too small. Like, no matter how much you don't think you have, your business or even your personal assets, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's all about return on investment. So the smaller organizations, they're set up like a home network. And so the time it takes to breach it, get in, do the damage, and ask for a payment. And even if the payment is much less, like, 5 figures, 20, 30 grand, which is still substantial for that small business or whatever, it doesn't matter. That they were able to pull that off quicker, and the return on investment is actually sometimes higher than going after the big, large scale enterprises with the huge 9-figure ransoms that take up the headlines. The bread and butter, I would agree with, small to medium sized businesses for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And, whoever's listening to this, if you have a managed service provider who keeps saying, hey, your business probably should be protected, let them support you. For the couple $1,000 investment that you'll make annually, I promise you the peace of mind, the ROI, which you're not necessarily going to see in a regular way, but you will see it through peace of mind. And just having your business protected is so important now. Like, now is the time. You are not too small to have the IT support you deserve and your business deserves.
Agreed. So let's talk about, ultimately everything back up and running. Like, how do you know, or what's your thoughts on when an organization has actually genuinely recovered, rather than simply all the systems are back online and, the business is working again?
You're listening to your IT people. That is a really, really good indication, and you're investing and trusting into what they are saying. Unfortunately, I will say that we cannot, as cybersecurity people, promise you 100% fortification. That's because the threat actors are literally driving innovation. They're coming up with the most creative ways to hack us. Now, we are on the defensive, which I would love for more conversations around how we can be on the offensive and be ahead of it. But after an attack like that, you're probably never 100% recovered. I talk to people all the time. They're like, oh yeah, that happened to me. They know exactly when and where. That's a trauma response, right? So you can learn lessons from it, but do what you can to fortify today so that if and when an attack happens, you are prepared.
That's good stuff. Yeah. And I guess, thank you for being on the show today. And, I guess for organizations, and people listening and thinking, we have backups, we have an incident response plan, so we're probably ready. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is one thing you would want them to examine a little more honestly?
Definitely test your backups. It doesn't matter if you have backups if you're not testing them. Do a penetration vulnerability scan once a quarter. There's money out there. There's grants out there for that. And then, make sure you have not only a plan written, but you're testing and executing it once a year. And those are big time investments, but I promise you do not want to go through an attack and have to be up 24/7 for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month, and lose millions of dollars in your business.
No, that's good stuff. Could not agree more. Tabletop.
And the gray hairs and the the actual
potentially heart attack
stress level. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Having done tabletop exercises regularly really puts you in a good spot, so you're not running around with your head cut on fire, when it does happen. I almost said if.
And by the way, OpenText offers all of those things. So
absolutely. Yeah. No, this is good stuff. Keelin, thank you again for joining me. Really giving us sort of an honest look at the part of the ransomware recovery that, rarely makes the headlines. And so big takeaway I would say is recovery isn't complete when the malware is gone or the servers are back online. It's when the business and its people can function again, trust their environment and their leadership, and then move forward again. Keelin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. I really appreciate the time and all the work you're doing, Tyler.